So hi, both of you. Thank you so much for being here today. So one of the things that all three of us have in common is this passion for giving youth and young adults tools to express themselves and imagine their futures. So I'd like to really get started today by asking both of you about your lives as young people and how you came to be artists and cultural producers and social organizers. What were your influences? How did you come to this path? William, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll go. I mean, uh, I went through the public school system here in Anaheim as well, right? So, and I think that was a huge influence too. I definitely, give a shout out to, sometimes I can't remember my teachers' names, but I remember the stuff they taught us, right? Early influences of like bringing San Cisneros, like books into classrooms, um, and 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 for me as a growing up in my neighborhood, I was I've always I would get a book and just read and then go play, right? And I think I was reading Jerry Soto when I didn't realize how important that was to see myself in books and literature and art. And the art part came afterwards because I was a high school student, a senior, and I hit senioritis, what they call it, and I slacked off. And I thought taking a photo class was actually going to be an easy way to, just get over senior year and then move on to what I thought, was going to be like a college like experiment and experience. Um, but I ended up actually like, you know, loving photography um, and my teacher at Anaheim was actually,
You mean
we
like
did
Anaheim High School? Is that where you
Anaheim High School.
graduated?
Yeah, that's where I graduated. And there wasn't many SLR cameras, which are more professional cameras, but he noticed a couple of the students that were really passionate about the work. So, you know, sometimes after class he'd be like, "Hey, William, like, he call out certain students, be like, I see that you have an eye for something, so here, take an SLR, the very few ones that we have. Just don't tell anybody else."
Yeah,
And then,
he like let you take it home and
yeah,
everything. That's awesome.
yeah. So, that's how it started, and I think, um, growing up in a city, in a place where there's a lot of imagination and dreams, and I was a kid growing up in apartment complexes, looking at the works at the fireworks at Disneyland, and
Right.
not making the connection that I actually live super close to this place.
Yeah.
Uh, I think for me, it was always a place where I was like, oh, I wish I could go there someday. Um, and then realizing when I moved out of Anaheim and coming back, um, that place was like literally like 3 miles away. Um,
And that's like what totally people think of Anaheim too, is Disneyland. You know, it's like
yeah,
the only kind of relationship that people have with Anaheim. And that's one of the things I think where the museo really needs to help change that.
mhm. Yeah, and there's knowing that there's these kind of two different cities that
Yeah.
people think, right? One that I think Frankie and I can attest to of growing up, with all these issues, right? Issues that deal with violence and some poverty and accessibility. That was all childhood for me, and it was a happy childhood, right? I had, we played a lot. We went out. I didn't go too far, right? This is kind of also something that I didn't explore Anaheim until, that at least my neighborhood, until I was older. Through my work, through photography, through making friendships and gathering around with friends. Um, and I think that was a huge influence of the stuff that I do today now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like you used kind of your natural talent as an artist to really explore the neighborhood you grew up in a different way, or maybe a more expansive way.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's really interesting. And Frankie, I knew you grew up in both LA and Anaheim.
I was born in Guerrero, Mexico, and I migrated to South Central when I was 6 years old, and I lived with my aunt for a little bit.
Hmm.
And then when my mom was able to cross and migrate, we moved to Anaheim with another aunt, mi tia Maria, and she was the first home that I had that I lived in with my mom and my dad and my sister. And she has just recently passed away with due to COVID-19. And so I've been thinking a lot about sort of Orange County, Anaheim, and the ways that our current history and my personal history with the city is always in flux, and how it has always been like that for a lot of people. I think I came to a lot of the influential work that I guess shaped me as both a writer and as an artist. It really came through a lot of movement work, and it came through first with my grandpa. Before
Like
we
a
even
lot of
migrate,
movement as in social movements, or like literally movement like dance movement?
both. I think that's cool that you're asking that question, because I think it's both. Because my mom, growing up in like the rural part of Acapulco where she lived in, and that's also a touristy city that
Yeah, for sure.
that oppresses its indigenous people. Um, but for my mom, she always wanted to be an artist, and they were very poor. And so when she had me, she wanted me to sort of stay away from all of the social justice movement work that my grandpa was in, because he was a journalist in the 60s and in the 70s in Mexico, and he covered a lot of that work, and he was persecuted because of that.
Right.
And my mom grew up,
safe.
my mom wanted me to keep me away from that, but at the same time had me in like theater groups in Mexico. And then when we migrated here to Anaheim and Los Angeles, I still found sort of the arts here. And it was through a lot of programs. Like I remember a program called Even a Start that was, I think, with Anaheim and Placentia, where my mom had to do like these volunteer hours, or she had to sign up for a raffle in order to get children's books. And I remember that was the first time I had picked up a Carmen Lomas Garza book. And she's like this artist from the Southwest, right, that paints these beautiful landscapes of her family. And I remember as a kid, like digging through it and being like, oh shit, this looks like my family. This looks like, these looks like our gatherings. And I was mesmerized by it. But that still didn't, like, I guess, translate into the K through 12, because I wasn't exposed to that in the classroom. And so I had my own journey through the schools. And I think I was always in the arts outside of school, that like by the time I was in high school and I was racialized and like pigeonholed into specific places, I did have certain teachers that like Mrs. Williamson, who was one of the only Black English teachers at Catella High School, had like reached out to me when I was on campus suspension. She came and she brought me a book, and she was like, I want you to read this. And little things like that, right, that I think made me see that like my story as an immigrant is connected to other people, but that there's also a Black struggle history in the US that like Latino Chicano immigrant kids should know about. And she exposed me to that in a way where it was like, hey, like, remember that this is all history, and that literature is history, and all of this is happening. And I think that sort of was my influence, is like both a lot of the spaces that my mom had me in, but then also the shared history that I have with immigrants, and sort of knowing that like, okay, this is me, but there's also, I am a light-skinned immigrant, so what is my role now in 2020? And when I think about my work and the quote unquote identity that I bring and the performance that I have out here. And so I'm always thinking about that now, because I think in 2012, when the shootings, back-to-back police-involved shootings happened, and we lost Joey Acevedo and Manuel Diaz, that was a point for me where I was with my friends protesting out in the streets, and I got very politicized, and I realized like there are groups that are organizing and that can do things about the things that I'm mad about. And there were teachers that were down, and there were teachers and principals that like to this day don't like me because of the organizing or because of the things that I was passionate about. And so Anaheim is so important to think about that. And I'm so grateful to you, Katie, and to the Museo to offering this space to really talk about like, how do we think, and why is our work saying these things now?
Right. I think that's such an important point, that like for me, and I would really love to hear both of your opinions on this too. For me, like obviously growing up as a white person, I have a completely different experience, right? A hugely privileged experience, but I did have the opportunity, have had the opportunity to work with arts and cultural organizations for a long time now. And I feel like that is where I learned more about the true history of like what happened here and what happens here. You know, it wasn't necessarily in school. And I think some of that is changing. But I just so commend this kind of movement to bring arts back into schools. And I know stuff is real messed up right now with the pandemic, but there is this resurgence of bringing art back into the schools. And there are a lot of organizations dedicated to, you know, really, really kind of helping kids get these tools and like really understand their lineage and their heritage. And like my heritage too, as a white person, like there's some gnarly stuff in my heritage that like in order to be an active part like of dismantling white supremacy, like I have to come to terms with. And I think it's really important that we also kind of educate white kids about that. But in terms of like the history and arts and culture meeting each other in a space, like that's what the museo is. We talk about being a place at the intersection of history and art and culture and heritage and representing our community. So like these conversations, I view a museum as being a space for conversation. And so what's your experience of museums like that, and how can we change to be better, and what are the most important aspects of being truly representative, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, right? And I think I've
Yeah.
mentioned before, in prior conversations I've had with you about, um, you know, there was, you know, I didn't go to a museum until I was older. And I think, you know, one of the first museums I did go was to Bowers, and, you know, looking at that and looking at the past and some stuff that has come about, from, you know, from this movement that it is happening, is like, we also need to do better in museum spaces. And, you know, I've been lucky enough to work in some spaces that are really, um, you know, they talk about accessibility, because I think that was one thing that I didn't. Yeah, and on top of that, it's looking, and then when I did get into museum, like who was I looking at? Um,
Right.
you know, whose you know, regalia stuff was posted on, like, right, it felt like, right, this, you know, this kind of robbing of our cultures as well sometimes. When I saw like stuff from, you know, from my family's like indigenous history, like in a museum, thinking like, oh, my mom doesn't even know about this stuff, right? Like, this is something that also she's disconnected because of these kind of like settler colonial, things that happen in our countries. And so I think, you know, being and now working in museums, I definitely see museums as kind of, uh, you know, what I would think. I'm not sure if Bettina Love or Bell Hooks said, like, museums as liberation spaces, as well as spaces where you can learn,
Mm-hmm.
not just, you know, um, thinking about spaces for teaching as a classroom, but also these other spaces, libraries, museums, community centers. Those can all be spaces where folks can learn about themselves, their history, their position in the place, right? And, you know, when I do go back and speak at some to high school students, like, I definitely see a small change that has happened, and they're proud to be now like Chicano, and I see them out in some of those protests too, right? And you know, it's something that I did was doing a little bit of when I was in high school, right? Um, I was wearing Che Guevara shirts in high school. I had like one for
Sure.
every week, one for every day of the week. And, you know, some teachers didn't like it. They're like, but right, but that was, you know, I was reading his autobiography, and I was reading, on my own, like, other authors that, you know, that weren't taught, right? So, um, you know, I think there's an opportunity for museums to, somehow, I would say, dismantle their structure and kind of, from the, you know, from the ground up, see what they can do, especially in these moments, where, I mean, we still see some issues in museums. Just recently with the Whitney Museum trying to,
Oh yeah.
right, and, you know, I think as artists, as BIPOC artists, we weren't taught to kind of, you know, be careful and be like, every time you do a sale, you should make a contract, right? It's just those skills weren't given to us, because, right, I never would have thought I would be an artist when I was in high school or middle school, right? A notion that for me was to, um, think of something that I can actually like uplift um, communities. And I thought being a doctor or being a lawyer was that.
Sure.
Uh, Being deadly wrong, being like, oh wait, actually, like artists are actually really great at uplifting communities. Um, through the notion of also myself being an educator and introducing and changing like the ways I write curriculum, um, to not just be I'm gonna teach black artists during Black History Month. No, I
Right.
got to throughout, and actually they were part of huge movements that changed, um, that changed the arts in general, right?
I think one of the reasons why also why I was also very interested in William's work was because I had run into his photographs through a friend and colleague of mine, Gabriel San Roman, who's a journalist. And they had done a piece together. And I was like, all right, who's this William guy? And then I had found out that he was in Chicago at the time. And at that same time, a couple of years ago, I was working as an organizer for the Orange County Congregation Community Organization. And I was very inspired by the work of young Chicago authors and like the way writers out there, like Nate Marshall and Eve Ewing, were connecting their organizing with their art. And as a youth organizer at the time, who I was trying to work on my writing on the side and on my own time, I had students telling me like, I want to do more writing workshops. I want to do this. And that's sort of how I was able to transfer um, some of the grants or funding into supporting the young folks to do that work, right? But it
Sure.
was because I saw that connection that people there were doing, and I realized that there's also a shared history in New York and in Oakland, and I just became obsessed with this idea of like, what if I can connect with more teachers and more educators in Anaheim that are very interested in this. And it came out to be that there have been pilot programs for arts ed programs in at Western. Jose Paulo Macalas has been trying to get ethnic studies to be a part of like the district curriculum in AUHSD. And so it's one of those things where we're at a very important place right now in history and in Anaheim where like people are trying to have these conversations of like, how do you make art part of the public square? And I remember I was talking to uh, Joey Liu about this, and I was like, I want to make a curriculum that agitates and politicizes our students. And she was like, first, I'm going to need you to take a step back, and I want you to center who they are, how they feel at the end of the day, what do they desire. And I think we can get in these moments where we're like, black, like these buzzwords, right? We're at that place
Sure.
now where like we have these key words. And what that taught me and what I'm always learning is that what is the day-to-day work that arts educators are doing. Like if we're an arts educator, are we also asking for their parents to have a livable wage, you know? So there's these intersecting things that I'm like realizing, and now I get to do right in some of the work I do. But I'm always thinking about that of like, museums are creating spaces. How can we make sure that, you know, my cousins that are in AUHSD school like know of the opportunities of what they can do?
How do we actually initiate a space where kids, like after school, like teens come and they write poetry together and they learn about each other? And so in the museum space, we always talk about activating empathy. Well, I think we talk about giving a space for empathy. And I kind of like take it up a notch, activating empathy, but I still think that that's not like enough. It's just not enough. So what do you both think about how, like, with all of your experience in youth organizing and educating, like the museo how can the museo be like a safe space? Because I don't know that it is right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it takes, sometimes we just need a physical space,
Yeah.
and I think, when I came back from Chicago, I learned so much from a lot of the work that was being done there, and realizing that, I can't first, like, I couldn't like come back and do my own programming, and I realized that, I came in, um, there was things that were stopping me because, I hadn't been back in a while. Also, like, folks were always asking me if I was like part of a nonprofit, which nonprofit I was working for. Um, that I couldn't just ask to go speak to some high schoolers because they don't know who I am, and I was like, oh, just Google my name. It's like it's up there. And it was trying to find like, I guess, legitimacy
Sure.
from folks that were already there, but I was like, I've been doing the work, right? And I think when I did finally get to speak to some folks, it's like they needed space to just kind of release any kind of stress they had, um, space where they can just kind of even just hang out and draw and somehow, I'm thinking of a space that one of my mentors created called Slangwich Studios, which is in Wilmington. Through this Mario Barra Jr. and her wife Carla Diaz. um, they kind of accidentally made a space for youth. And I think being a museum space, is being um, able to show the folks that really can be connected to their lived experiences, and then learn some stuff after that in those spaces, right? Like, right, it'd be amazing if we get like a big retrospective of Emilio Vasquez, which his murals like down the street.
Down the street, totally.
And students can learn about his life, and then create some kind of work that's based around that experience, um, and create space for these untold histories to be centered, and let folks kind of like come and consume it, and navigate that, and realize that we have these spaces, that we've had these movements in Anaheim, right? Because I always see like, I've been in some talks with friends of mine through Zoom and just like political education, and some folks are new to Orange County, and some of us that know the history, that have dug a little bit of what has happened in Orange County. I was like, no, we've had those struggles, and you know you know sadly they're not centered, but they're still there, right? Because there has always been the struggle for for rights in Orange County, right? And a lot of folks don't know that, and I think even giving these tools, if the museo was able to give those tools to the students, to the youth, through art, through poetry, there's great uh, folks in Anaheim, and I'm trying to remember his name. Oh yeah, Emiliano Martinez is like, um, he's a great like songwriter of corridos, which is like, these ballads, and
Yeah.
these ballads that got turned now into like narc stuff, but they were really just like kind of like, history told in folklore, like, but they were like, hey, there was a struggle of the orange pickers. He wrote a lot about the citrus, like, the citrus workers, and stuff that happened in Anaheim and Orange County. And I think having accessibility to that, through museums, is a great way to kind of create these someone called like safe spaces. But I think they're just spaces for exploration and exploring the history that people can relate to.
So the two of you came together to create a zine. And I definitely want to get to the point where we can show some of the work. And I know, Frankie, you're going to read. So, but first, can you just Frankie, can you kind of like walk us through what's a zine? Why did you choose this medium to express? And like, what's the main idea?
I think for William and I have been trying to we're always trying to work on things. And I'm going to be the very transparent one and say that, like, I'm always pitching stuff to William, and William's like, cool. And then out of the 10 pitches, 3 come out, or 2, right? And so
Not
I
every
think
idea has to win. Like, ideas are just, they can be ideas just for ideas. We don't have to, no idea is bad.
We're very, very blessed to have a shared friend, Jess F. Castillo, who is an incredible designer here in Los Angeles. And I think there were like conversations that both of us were having with her, and we like realized like, okay, let's work on something together collaboratively. And I think the initial strategy was, okay, William, like, you have some photographs, let me respond to them, and vice versa. And so I think it came, and William did ask me to read the introduction of the zine that I wrote, and so I think maybe that could start that
Yeah,
conversation,
let's
and
do
then we
it.
can read.
Yeah.
Okay, so Romneya Drive connects Francisco's Primo's house with William's childhood home in what is currently the city of Anaheim. William grew up on Romney in the late 90s, walking down to Manzanita Park. His attachment to that street is one close to his heart. He remembers walking with his older cousins, skating with his homies, and the countless nights running under the Anaheim stars. Francisco remembers long walks with his primos on Romney, visiting for puro pinche party, con jumper y todo, or movie nights they hated leaving. They still visit this time with most of the primos away, some away as memory, and some away as only phone calls you need to pay for. Romney Drive is a place of memory, a thread, or a bridge between the photograph and the poetry. The following are photographs by William Camargo with poems and conversation by Francisco Aviles Pino. A very big warm thank you to Jess V. Castillo of Este for weaving this collection together of odes to place and the people who make it.
Awesome. So like, tell us really quick, like, I know you're going to show us some of the art, but tell us, take a step back, like, what is a zine?
I think you go for it, William, you go.
I want all people to start making zines. So like, as accessible a definition of what is a zine. So what's a zine?
They're all like encompassing, right? And I think because of that, you're just saying, right, we're making zines out of for everything, right? And I think that's one thing too, is like accessibility, right? It's a cheaper way to actually, like, you know, I never was like a subscriber of any of these like big magazines, right? Like
Right.
I know sometimes we would get stuff on the mail, or like $20 for a year like subscription to Time magazine. So I mean, it's a cheap way, and it's a very DIY thing, right? Do it yourself. And I've taught zines in different ways, like it's it can be also very informative, right? Like, you know, in organizing spaces, we um you know, we write things down in case, you know, you're stopped by ICE. Like, we hand out zines that specifically tell you what to do. Others can be very, you know, can be just be poetry or words. And I think that's one thing, right? It just being able to grab computer paper, and you can make a quick 8-page scene with just that. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, we try to, when we were making this thing, we're like, you know, obviously we wanted a little nicer, not too rough, but it still be able to kind of spread it in a way um, that was going to be, you know, seen in Anaheim as well. Um, you know, we did well, like Frankie did a, you know, thing in Anaheim at the public library.
It was a talk. Shout out to Byron, shout out to Chloe. They had invited me to talk in conversation with Alice Bags, and I was like, you know what? Let's use this as a way to like present the zine. And so I remember I was at the podium and I was like, shout out to William. The photographies are in it. Buy them in the back.
Awesome.
But yeah, big shout out to Chloe and Byron and Brianna. They really hold it down at that Anaheim Public Library.
And Emily, yeah, for sure. They do a
yes.
great job. Totally. All right. So let's, like, without further ado, let's see it. And
All
let's
right,
hear
so
it.
I'll be sharing some images that I've just done in that talk about Anaheim. And some of those are included in the zine, and you know, we're working on another volume that hopefully will have more stuff. All right, I'll go through the slideshow, and then I think Frankie, you can start.
I wrote this one after a beautiful photograph that William made of his mom's room, and I thought about the Unite Here hotel workers that I've gotten to know over the years, and I wrote it in one of the hotel worker unions perspectives, and it's called Unite Here, and it's after a poem by Ross Gay. Look, my hands are made of other hands that are made of other hands. And those hands made cars, they cooked the dorm food, they made their beds with no tip when they check out. But I am not a surrender, I am not cleaning at home. My son attends Sunkus Elementary. He walks there alone the way I taught him to. My daughter studies sociology. She takes the bus to UC Irvine and sometimes forgets to call when she's back home. My color is pink. My room a collection of long breaths.
Cool. Awesome. Now I'm gonna show a little bit of the some of my work, but also it's like everything. All is pretty much Anaheim. All the work I do is pretty much very personal to me. And this is also in the zine, which is called About a Half a Mile from Disneyland,
Awesome.
and it's literally on a neighborhood that's on the other side of the 5 freeway that runs through right through Disneyland. Um, unfortunately, this was gonna show at my thesis show, and it's a big 30 by 40 print framed. Um, so hopefully one day I'll show it. Oh well, yeah, we actually it might be one of the ones that I chose for the future stuff that Kitty and I are working on.
No, it's cool. We are having an exhibition of some of William's work on the outside of our building and in our windows starting October 3rd. So it's going to be a whole new way for
God.
museo to present. Yeah, we can't have people inside.
Is this breaking news? Is this the announcement?
I guess this is the announcement. Yeah, October 3rd is the date opens, and it's in collaboration with Grand Central and Santa Ana, and then of course Cal State Fullerton's Begovich Gallery. So Begovich, Jennifer Freyas really brought us all together to be able to kind of do some innovative stuff and put William's work on the outside, which is really cool.
Yeah. So yeah, there's another image, and I think one thing that Frankie and I do is we I'm very invested in, and I look at the history of photography, and I try to also challenge that and question what we've always been taught in school and history, um, and also add to it, right? So this is after Stephen Shore, who's a famous photographer. Uh, but then I call it in Penguin City and Paisa, right? Which is a very much kind of browning of what I call the canon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, this one, I've been making since I've been home too. I've been making more personal work as well, and it's all personal. But I think these small like moments that I always connect to my childhood too, right? I when I posted this up, a lot of folks were saying like, I remember doing this, right? Thinking that um, whenever we have the water hose, we would just my dad would just cut it, and then like my brother thought he can, we would do this thing where we can just try to see how far we can spray the water.
Yeah, sure.
Of course, he'd be like, "No, you have to actually walk around instead of just stay in that one spot and think you can do everything."
The rules of the game.
Yeah, yeah. So I think this is and this work is all um, shot on film, and I still do a lot of all my stuff is in film, and then I scan it, and I always want this work to be, um, when I print it big, because I want folks to, whenever you're in a space, especially in a museum space, right? I think I want our presence known, and I think that's a huge thing when it comes to my work is you know putting this big hand in there. It's my brother's hand. It's a brown hand, and composed in a way from the history that I do know, like photography, right? I've mentioned like in the beginning, like I got my MFA, and later on I might get my PhD, right? Knowing that history and kind of just trying to include ourselves in it too, but also be part of it, right? And um, this is another one from that show as well, which is also I have another version of it in the zine. And I think maybe Frankie, you want to read another poem you can bring up?
Yeah, Frankie, do
You
you
want?
have the poem that goes along with the other image of Elizabeth in the zine?
see.
I have a poem that goes along with the boys.
Yeah,
'Cause I
let's
didn't
get,
write
Oh, this
one.
one? Okay, I love this image.
And this one is inspired by a series that the Chicago poet Dr. Eva Ewing wrote that ends with like a retelling. And what's funny is I went to high school with the boy in the middle. So when I saw
Wait,
it,
which
I
one?
was
Like in the red shirt or the white shirt?
the white shirt.
Oh yeah, I guess that kid
Yeah.
in the red shirt looks really young. Like really young.
So I was just, I got emotional. And then I was thinking about a lot of, okay, how can I respond to this? And so I wrote, I wrote about a memory I had when I was organizing an Anna Drive for to support the people that were living there on like a parking ordinance that they were pushing the city to do. Um, and I ended up going to a lot of soccer games. So that's what this reminded me of. Okay, jumping fences for soccer, a retelling. We are kind boys. We are shy boys. We play over the fence of a middle school. The city locked up. We remember sorrow. We remember across the street he had a name once. We remember his name. Our moms, they jumped the fence too. They bring us water to watch our game. We remember our shoes grow bigger, that there is a park 2 blocks down. We remember as our shoes grow bigger, that there is a park 2 blocks down. But there's nothing like the grass that knows you when you're on it. Alternate ending. We are more than boys. We are memory. We laugh so loud we wonder if there was anything that ever made us scared. We tell each other when we are scared. We hold. We remember, we remember, we remember.